It was the sort of morning that would pass unnoticed in any other town, a scene as ordinary as the weather itself. The flower show in the village hall had begun with the same quiet bustle of elderly women arranging roses and dahlias in neat vases. A council meeting was scheduled at the local church hall, but few expected much more than the usual back and forth about budget allocations for road repairs. Even the chatter in the railway buffet was as predictable as the grey skies. Train, timetables, tea orders, and a scattering of irrelevant news from nearby villages. But then there was the nun. The appearance of Sister Agatha, who had wandered into town from the nearby convent to procure a few items from the local shop, was, for the most part, unremarkable. She was a quiet figure, dressed in the traditional habit, her face partially veiled. She was in her mid-60s, with soft, round features that had earned her the title of the kindly one at the convent. But something had happened when she stepped out of that tiny shop at the corner of Oxford Street, clutching a few parcels and perhaps her thoughts. It was the sort of thing that in a town like Purbright one could overlook. No one gave much thought to her until she was seen again, hours later, still carrying the same parcels, but missing the usual air of composure that accompanied her every step. Sister Agatha had, without ceremony, disappeared. The packets, discarded by the side of the street, spoke of a simple task. The rest of the scene, the stillness that settled over the town in the hours following, would have passed without note if it hadn't been for the unsettling silence that followed her vanishing. A few folks had whispered about her mysterious absence. Some had speculated that perhaps she had simply returned early to the convent, but no one truly believed that explanation. Not entirely. Gossip, as it always does in small towns, began to circulate as the afternoon crept on and the steady hum of normalcy continued. Word reached Inspector Purbright. Though he had been occupied with a report from the police constable detailing a minor theft from the general store, his ears pricked up at the mention of the missing nun. "Don't worry, Purbright," said Sergeant Smith, offering a crooked smile. "Probably just a case of old age or something. I hear she forgets her glasses half the time." Purbright did not reply immediately. He was already studying the small details, the whispers in the corner of the room, the fidgeting of the officers as they awaited their next assignment, the subtle undercurrent of concern in the town's voice. The inspector, tall and lean, with his dishevelled brown hair and habitual bow tie, nodded and sipped his tea. There was nothing in the world that could speed up his process. He had learned that it was never the first report that mattered. His mind, sharp and deliberate, shifted from fact to theory with a disarming patience. There was more to this than a simple missing person. He could sense it. Purbright stood up, his long coat flowing behind him, and made his way to the door. Sergeant Smith's voice trailed off as the inspector left the station. He did not hurry. He never did. Every step was calculated. It was the simple things that often betrayed the bigger picture, Purbright knew. When small events happened, the usual course of action was to explain them away. But sometimes the quietest actions were the most telling. And so it was that the inspector set off toward Oxford Street. As Purbright approached the corner of the street, a group of locals gathered outside the shop where Sister Agatha had last been seen. Their faces were tight with concern, and a hushed conversation took place in the doorway. Among them was Mr. Moretti, the local shopkeeper. He was a stout man, perpetually red-faced, his vest strained at the seams. "Ah, Inspector Purbright, good of you to come," Mr. Moretti said with a forced grin, his hands rubbing his apron. "I do say, it's most strange what with Sister Agatha, not like her at all." "Quite," Purbright replied. His voice was soft, measured. "Tell me, Mr. Moretti, Did you see anything unusual before she disappeared? Moretti hesitated, scratching his chin. Nothing much, Inspector. She came in, bought her usual tea and biscuits, and went out like any other day. But, well, she looked a bit off, like she'd seen something. Her eyes were darting about as though she was searching for someone. Purbright nodded. A small detail, perhaps trivial, but it caught his attention. Did she say anything unusual? Not at all, just the usual pleasantries. Said she needed some tea for the convent's evening service. Nothing more, really. Moretti's voice had an edge to it now, as though there was something he wasn't quite revealing. Purbright didn't press further. Instead, he studied the scene, noting the discarded parcels near the shop's entrance. The contents had spilled out, and inside, a bundle of bread, some tea bags, and a small jar of jam lay half open on the cobblestones. How long ago did you last see her? Purbright asked. About 2 hours, maybe more, Moretti replied, his gaze drifting uneasily. I've told the constables, and they said they'll take care of it. But you're right to come, Inspector. There's something odd about all this. Purbright turned to the gathering crowd. He could feel their expectations, an undercurrent of worry that not even the gossip could suppress. The town was anxious, and none didn't vanish from Oxford Street without good reason. As the inspector turned to leave, he caught sight of an elderly woman standing near the bakery, peering at him through a pair of thick spectacles. Mrs. Vance, a fixture in town gossip, was known to have a penchant for making unsolicited comments about everyone and everything. Her face was pinched as she observed him, but there was no kindness in her eyes. Inspector, you do know she's been acting peculiar, don't you? Mrs. Vance called out, her voice dry. I saw her talking to that stranger by the post office a few days ago, mumbled something about the old place before she scurried off like a rat. Did she? Purbright said, turning back with a mild smile. How interesting. It was a small detail, but the kind of thing Purbright valued. A new thread to pull on. As he continued his walk, he pondered the significance of the clues, the unnerving silence, the odd behavior, the discarded parcels, and he found himself increasingly sure that something far more sinister was at work. The quiet, measured life of this town had been interrupted, and Purbright had no intention of letting the mystery slip into the shadows. Purbright's footsteps were soft but deliberate as he moved through the alleyway, his eyes never leaving the figure ahead. She was quick, weaving between the stone buildings. With a sense of urgency, her movements betraying the same tension Purbright had observed earlier in the church. Whoever she wasn't just taking a stroll. She was trying to get somewhere, or someone that she didn't want anyone else to know about. The alley narrowed, leading into a part of the town that Purbright wasn't as familiar with. It was quiet here, tucked away from the main thoroughfares where the noise of the marketplace and the bustle of daily life usually drowned out everything else. But this part of town, hidden behind old stone walls with ivy creeping up the sides, held secrets. Some of them were small, trivial even, but some of them, Purbright knew, were not. He quickened his pace, keeping to the shadows. He was almost certain now that the young woman was involved in something connected to Sister Agatha's disappearance. Was she a friend, an accomplice? Someone who knew more than she was letting on? She turned a corner sharply, and Purbright followed. As he rounded the bend, he found himself on a narrow street lined with small cottages and weathered doors. The figure was nowhere to be seen. For a moment, he stood still, his senses heightened. The street was eerily quiet, the only sound the rustling of leaves in the wind. Then, just as quickly as she had disappeared, the figure emerged from one of the cottages ahead. She hadn't gone far. Purbright had been right on her trail. The woman knocked on the door of the cottage, her hand trembling ever so slightly. Purbright remained hidden, watching from a distance, waiting for the next move. The door opened, but only a crack, and the two exchanged a few quiet words. Purbright couldn't hear them, but the body language was telling. The woman seemed anxious. The other person, whoever they were, appeared calm but guarded. Something was happening here, something that was not meant for the eyes of the townsfolk. The door closed after a brief exchange, and the young woman stepped back, glancing over her shoulder once more before walking away down the street in the direction she had come from. Purbright stayed still for a few moments longer, letting the scene settle in his mind. It wasn't until the woman had disappeared from sight that Purbright made his move. He approached the cottage cautiously, his mind racing. The encounter, brief as it was, had told him everything he needed to know. Someone was involved with Sister Agatha's disappearance, someone who had knowledge of her, and perhaps even her past. He reached the door and knocked softly. He didn't expect an immediate response, but it was worth a try. When no one came to the door, he knocked again, a little louder this time. There was a brief hesitation before the door opened. An older man stood there, his face lined with age, his eyes sharp despite his years. He was dressed in a faded shirt and trousers, looking every bit the part of the quiet, unassuming retiree. But Purbright knew better than to trust appearances. "Good afternoon," Purbright said, offering a polite nod. "Inspector Purbright, I'm investigating the disappearance of Sister Agatha." "May I have a word?" The man blinked, then nodded curtly. "Come in if you must," he said, his voice rough but not unfriendly. "Though I don't see what I have to do with any nun disappearing." Purbright stepped inside, his gaze sweeping over the small but tidy interior. The cottage was sparsely furnished, the shelves lined with old books and an assortment of trinkets. A fire crackled softly in the hearth, and the scent of wood smoke lingered in the air. It was peaceful, too peaceful for the kind of situation Purbright found himself in. "I won't keep you long," Purbright said, taking a seat in the chair where the man had gestured to. "I've been following a lead, and it brought me here. You're quite familiar with the town, I imagine. Perhaps you've seen someone unusual in the area lately. A young woman, perhaps, well-dressed, but not from here." The man studied him for a moment before sitting down across from him. "Can't say I've noticed anyone fitting that description," he replied, his voice betraying no hint of nervousness. "I keep to myself mostly. Don't like to get involved in things that don't concern me." Purbright nodded slowly, observing the man's every movement. "That's understandable. But you must have noticed that Sister Agatha has been absent. She hasn't made it to the service today, and she was last seen in the village about 2 hours. Ego, I'm trying to piece things together." The man's eyes flickered just slightly, almost imperceptibly, but it was enough for Purbright to take note. "I don't know anything about that," the man said, his voice becoming slightly more guarded. "Maybe she went for a walk or something. Sister Agatha's a grown woman. She can take care of herself." Purbright leaned forward slightly, his gaze unwavering. "It's odd, don't you think? A nun, a fixture in this town for years, suddenly vanishing without a word. And then a stranger, someone connected to her, appears right before she disappears. There's more to this than you're letting on, Mr. Lyle. I'd appreciate your cooperation." The older man's face tightened, and for a brief moment Purbright thought he might have overstepped. But instead of refusing him outright, Mr. Lyle sighed and nodded slowly, as if he had been expecting this moment. "You're right. About one thing, Inspector," Mr. Lyle said quietly. "There's more to it, but I can't tell you everything." "Not yet. What I know, well, it involves things that are best left in the past," Purbright sat back in his chair, his mind racing with possibilities. The man was clearly hiding something, and Purbright knew he had to press on. "You'll need to tell me, Mr. Lyle. This is about Sister Agatha. I'm not going to let this mystery remain unsolved." For a long moment, Mr. Lyle said nothing. Then finally, he spoke, his voice low and filled with an unease that wasn't there before. "If you must know, Sister Agatha was never really a nun, not in the way you think." Purbright's mind quickened as Mr. Lyle's words hung in the air, like an unspoken threat. Sister Agatha was never really a nun? The statement rattled in his mind, the implications suddenly far-reaching and murky. "Not in the way I think," Purbright repeated, his voice calm but his attention sharp. "What exactly do you mean by that?" Mr. Lyle shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. His earlier confidence had evaporated, replaced by something far more cautious. There was a moment of silence, the kind where Purbright knew a decision was being made. Finally, Mr. Lyle sighed, long and weary. "It's not as simple as it seems, Inspector," Mr. Lyle said, his voice lower now. "Sister Agatha, she wasn't always a nun. In fact, she wasn't always even Sister Agatha. Her name, back then, was Elizabeth Porter. She was a young woman who came here to escape something or someone. I don't know the full story, mind you, only bits and pieces, but it was enough to make her want to change, to start over." Purbright leaned in slightly, his curiosity piqued. "Go on," he encouraged, though his voice remained measured. "She arrived here about 20 years ago, under a different name," Mr. Lyle continued. "Elizabeth Porter, an orphan, so she said. She joined the convent shortly after. Said she wanted to devote her life to helping others, but there were whispers, even back then, whispers about her past, about things she was running from." "Whispers?" Purbright pressed, watching the older man carefully. "What sort of things?" Mr. Lyle hesitated, his gaze flickering towards the window, as if the answer might come from somewhere beyond the cottage walls. "I don't know all the details, but it had to do with someone, a man, I believe. Someone from her past. The kind of man you don't just forget." Purbright's eyes narrowed, his mind racing. A man. There it was. The past that Sister Agatha had mentioned, the words she had muttered in the church hall. Not running away this time. It was starting to come together, but there was still something he wasn't seeing, something that Mr. Lyle wasn't telling him. "Did she ever say anything else about this man?" Purbright asked, his tone casual, but his mind was already connecting dots. Mr. Lyle sighed again, the weight of the years pressing down on him. "Only that she was afraid. She said he would come back. I didn't think much of it at the time. People say things in passing, don't they? But now, looking back, I'm not so sure." Purbright's thoughts turned over the information like a carefully examined clue. A woman who had started a new life, but never truly escaped her past. A man who had haunted her for years. And now, Sister Agatha, Elizabeth Porter, had gone missing under mysterious circumstances. The connection was becoming clearer, but it still didn't explain everything. "Where did she go after she left the convent?" Purbright asked. "Did she ever try to leave the town?" "No, she never left. She stayed here in the town, keeping to herself mostly. There were rumors from time to time, of course. People saw her talking to strangers, coming and going late at night. But no one ever thought much of it. She wasn't the kind to go out of her way to make a fuss. Still, there were times when she'd disappear for a few days. Nothing big, nothing unusual. But she'd always come back like nothing had happened." Mr. Lyle paused, his eyes clouding with memory. "Except this time. This time is different. Purbright's brow furrowed. The pieces were falling into place, but there were still too many gaps. You said she was afraid. Do you know if she had any contact with this man, this person from her past? I don't know, Mr. Lyle admitted, his voice heavy with regret. But I do know that she had, well, how can I put it? A look in her eyes sometimes, like she was waiting for something bad, like she knew it was coming. The silence between them deepened as Purbright absorbed this new information. He felt the weight of the mystery pressing down on him. Now, too many unanswered questions, too many things left unsaid. Sister Agatha, or Elizabeth Porter, had clearly been living in fear for years. But why? And what had brought her to the point of vanishing? Mr. Lyle, Purbright said, breaking the silence. Do you know if anyone else knew about her past? Any other people in town who might be aware of what she was running from? The older man shook his head slowly. Not that I'm aware of. She kept to herself for the most part, didn't make close friends. The other nuns at the convent, they're more like a family to her now, but I can't say if they knew. She was always private, you know, always kept a distance from everyone. Purbright stood, his mind already working through the next steps. The story Mr. Lyle had shared only deepened the mystery. A woman with a shadowed past, a secret fear, and now a disappearance. What had finally forced Sister Agatha to confront whatever or whoever she had been running from? Thank you, Mr. Lyle, Purbright said, his voice resolute. I'll be in touch if I need to know more. And if you think of anything else, anything at all, don't hesitate to contact me. As he stepped outside the cottage and into the cool, damp air, Purbright's mind was filled with a new set of questions. Who was this man from her past? What did he want? And why had Sister Agatha been so afraid of him all these years? The town was hiding more than it seemed, and Purbright knew that the answers lay buried somewhere beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered. His steps quickened as he made his way back to the heart of the village. The search for Sister Agatha had just become far more complicated. The simple disappearance of a nun had turned into a much darker puzzle, and Purbright was determined to solve it. Something told him that the answers weren't going to be easy to find, and that the people of this quiet little town had more secrets than they were willing to admit. The evening air had turned colder as Purbright made his way back to the centre of town, his thoughts still tangled in the web of Sister Agatha's past. The mystery was thickening, and yet he felt a strange sense of urgency now, as if the pieces were close to falling into place. His mind was already turning, wondering who this man from her past was and why he seemed to have such a hold over her life. As he reached the main square, Purbright saw a few townsfolk milling about, finishing up their errands for the day. The normalcy of the scene felt unsettling now, as though the facade of small-town life was starting to crack. Everyone was going about their business, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something much darker was lurking just beneath the surface. He paused in front of the town's small pub, a place that had served as the social heart of the community for generations. Its warm glow beckoned him, and though he wasn't one to indulge in idle gossip, he knew the pub was as good a place as any to hear whispers. People here weren't always careful about what they said, especially when they'd had a few pints. There might be something useful, some snippet of information, he hoped, that would help him get closer to finding out what had happened to Sister Agatha. Inside, the pub was comfortably noisy, laughter, clinking glasses, and the hum of casual conversation filled the air. Purbright made his way to the bar and greeted the barman, who was polishing a glass with a rag. The barman, a wiry man in his late 50s with a permanent squint, looked up as Purbright approached. "Evening, Inspector. What can I get you?" he asked. his voice hoarse from years of serving drinks. "Nothing for me, thank you," Purbright replied, his eyes scanning the room. "I'm just here to ask a few questions. I'm looking for information about Sister Agatha, Elizabeth Porter." At the mention of her real name, the barman's hand froze, the rag still in midair. For a brief moment, Purbright thought he might have overstepped, but the barman quickly recovered, his eyes flicking nervously around the room. "Sister Agatha? Well, you know. She's not the most talked about lady in here," the barman muttered, his gaze darting to a corner where a group of regulars sat. "But I reckon a few folks know her better than most. What's all this about her going missing? Ain't that a bit strange like?" "It is," Purbright said, his voice calm. "I'm trying to piece together what happened. Anything you can tell me, anything unusual you've heard, might be helpful." The barman hesitated. There was a long silence, as if he was weighing whether to speak or not. Finally, he leaned in closer, lowering his voice. "Well, there was that business with the stranger a few months ago. You remember, don't you?" he said, glancing over his shoulder to make sure no one was listening. "Came in one night, this fella. Didn't stick around long, but I remember his face. He was odd. A bit too polished for a town like ours. And he kept looking over his shoulder, like someone was after him. I thought maybe he was some sort of traveller, but I don't know." Purbright's curiosity piqued. "Did you speak to him?" "Not much. He didn't seem interested in conversation. Just kept to himself, sat at a corner table, and ordered something strong. But there was something about him. I don't know. He looked like he was waiting for something or someone." "Did he speak to Sister Agatha, Elizabeth Porter?" The barman shook his head. "I didn't see them talk, but, you know, she was in here that night. Not long before he left. Couldn't miss her. Always so calm and proper, like she belonged somewhere else. It was just odd, the way he kept looking at her, like he was waiting for her to notice him." "I don't know. It's all a bit foggy now." Purbright's mind raced. A man polished, out of place, waiting for Sister Agatha to notice him. The pieces were beginning to fit together, though the puzzle was far from complete. This man might be the key to understanding the events leading up to her disappearance. "Do you remember what he looked like?" Purbright asked, his voice low but steady. The barman's eyes narrowed as he thought. Tall, dark hair, well-dressed. He had a sharp look about him, like he didn't belong in a place like this. Maybe late 30s? And his eyes cold, you know? It's like he was hiding something. Purbright nodded, committing the details to memory. "Do you know where he went after leaving the pub?" The barman shrugged. "No idea. Left in a hurry, though. Didn't finish his drink, but if you ask me, I think he might have been watching her. Watching Elizabeth." "Thank you," Purbright said, offering a polite nod before turning to leave. His mind was already racing. He had his first real lead. This stranger, whoever he was, seemed to have more than a passing interest in Sister Agatha. Perhaps he was connected to her past. Perhaps he was the reason she had disappeared. Purbright stepped back out into the cool evening air, the street lights casting long shadows across the cobblestones. His instincts told him that this man was central to the mystery, but he needed more. He needed to track him down, find out who he was, and understand what had brought him to this quiet little town. He wasn't sure where the trail would lead, but Purbright was certain of one thing. Sister Agatha's disappearance was not a random event. It was the result of something much deeper, a connection to the past, to a man who was still hiding in the shadows. As he made his way back toward the constable's office, Purbright's thoughts were focused entirely on this stranger. He would find him, and when he did, the truth would finally come to light. The night had deepened, and the streets of the town had grown quieter, save for the occasional sound of a door closing or a dog barking in the distance. Purbright's thoughts were now fixed entirely on the stranger the barman had described, a man with dark, cold eyes who had arrived in town months ago and seemed to have vanished just as quickly as he'd appeared. The more Purbright thought about it, the more he realized that the timing couldn't have been a coincidence. Sister Agatha had started acting strange around the same time, and now she was missing. There was still so much he didn't know. Who was this man? Why had he come to town? And why did he seem to be watching Elizabeth Porter, the woman who had reinvented herself as Sister Agatha? Everything about her life seemed wrapped in mystery, but it was beginning to feel like her. Past was coming to catch up with her. Purbright's steps were steady as he walked back toward the constable's office. He wasn't expecting any immediate breakthroughs, but the information from the pub had given him a new direction. He needed to find out where this stranger had gone, who he really was, and what his connection to Elizabeth Porter was. There had to be a link, a reason he had come to the town, a reason he had left without a trace. As he walked past the rows of quaint houses, the dim light from their windows casting long shadows across the cobblestone street, he thought about the barman's words again. The stranger had been watching Elizabeth, waiting for her to notice him. But what if she had? What if there had been some kind of meeting, some unspoken recognition between them? What had she been running from, and why had she disappeared the moment he arrived? Purbright's thoughts were interrupted when he reached the constable's office. The small building was quiet, the only sound the faint rustling of papers inside. The constable, a young man named Henry, was still at his desk, hunched over a pile of paperwork. He looked up as Purbright entered, his face lighting up with recognition. "Good evening, sir," Constable Henry said, standing up quickly. "Anything new on the case?" Purbright glanced around the room before speaking. "Yes, actually. I've learned something interesting about the woman we're looking for. Sister Agatha, or rather Elizabeth Porter, wasn't always a nun. She had a life before this one, a past she's been hiding from. And I think that past is what's come back to haunt her." The constable's expression changed, his brows furrowing in confusion. "A past? What do you mean? Could someone from her past have come to town?" Purbright nodded, his eyes narrowing. "Yes. There was a man, a stranger, who came here months ago. I'm beginning to think he's the key to all of this. The barman at the pub remembered him, said he seemed out of place, like he was waiting for something or someone. I think this man is the reason she's gone missing, the reason she disappeared when he arrived." Constable Henry's eyes widened. "That's a big claim, sir. Are we sure it's the same person? Couldn't it just be coincidence?" "I don't believe in coincidences," Purbright said firmly. "I need to find out who he is, where he went, and what his connection to Sister Agatha is. Do you have any information on strangers who might have come through the town recently?" The constable hesitated, flipping through a few pages on his desk. "There's no record of anyone matching that description, not officially at least. But that doesn't mean he wasn't here. Small towns like ours don't always keep track of every passerby. People come and go all the time, and sometimes they leave without anyone noticing, but I'll dig through the records again. Maybe something will turn up." Purbright nodded, his mind already shifting to the next step. "You do that. Meanwhile, I'm going to pay another visit to the pub and see if I can find anyone else who might have seen this man. There's something about his behavior that's bothering me. I don't think he just came to town on a whim. He was looking for something, or someone." As Purbright turned to leave, Constable Henry's voice called out, "Sir, if you find anything, let me know. I'll keep checking the records. We can't let this go unnoticed." Purbright gave a curt nod and stepped back into the night. The cold air hit him immediately, but it didn't deter him. His focus was sharp, his mind racing through all the possibilities. The stranger had been here months ago, but now the pieces were coming together. He had been watching Sister Agatha, or Elizabeth Porter, from the shadows. And now she was gone. It was clear now that Sister Agatha hadn't just disappeared for some simple reason. This wasn't a case of someone losing their way or wandering
off. No, this was something far more calculated. Someone had been watching her. Someone had been waiting for the right moment to make their move.
But why? Purbright made his way back to the pub, his eyes scanning the streets as he walked. It was late now, and most of the shops had already closed. Only the pubs remained open, where the few remaining souls who hadn't yet gone home still gathered. When he arrived at the pub, it was as noisy as before, filled with the low hum of conversation and the clinking of glasses. Purbright entered, his eyes immediately searching for familiar faces. He moved toward the bar and caught the barman's eye. The man nodded in greeting, but Purbright could tell he was distracted, his mind elsewhere. He was probably thinking about the conversation they'd had earlier. Purbright leaned in slightly, his voice low. "I need to know more about that stranger. Anyone else see him around? Anyone who might know where he went?" The barman hesitated, his eyes flicking nervously to the group of regulars still sitting in the corner.
"I don't know, Inspector, but there's someone who might know more. Old Mrs. Fenwick, she's lived here longer than anyone. She's got a sharp memory, and she doesn't miss much. If anyone knows about this stranger, it'll be her." Bright
nodded, grateful for the tip. "Where can I find her?" The barman pointed toward the far end of the pub. "She's usually over there by the fireplace. She comes in most nights, has a drink, and watches the world go by. She's got her opinions on everything. Maybe she'll talk to you." Purbright thanked him and walked toward the table where Mrs. Fenwick sat, an elderly woman with grey hair and a look of quiet authority. She was watching the room with a keen eye, her hands resting on the table in front of her. Purbright pulled out a chair and sat down across from her. "Good evening, Mrs. Fenwick," he said, his tone polite but direct. "I'm investigating the disappearance
of Sister Agatha. I understand you might know a thing or two about the people who pass through this town."
Mrs. Fenwick regarded him for a long moment, her sharp eyes never leaving his. Then, with a slight smile, she leaned forward. "I've lived in this town for more years than I care to count, Inspector. I've seen a lot of things. And if you want to know about the stranger who came through here, I can tell you what I remember." Mrs. Fenwick's eyes remained steady on Purbright, the faintest glimmer of amusement in her gaze as she studied him. She wasn't one to reveal much, but Purbright could tell she was intrigued. For all her years, Mrs. Fenwick had seen enough
of the world to know when something was out of place, and she didn't suffer fools easily. "Stranger, you say?" Mrs. Fenwick's voice was a soft rasp, each word measured. "I remember the one you mean. He came in here one evening, sat in that
corner over there, didn't say much, just ordered a drink and stared out the window like he was waiting for someone. He had the look of someone who'd been traveling too long, didn't quite fit in with the rest of us. But there's more to it, I'll tell you."
That? Purbright leaned in slightly, his attention now fully on her. "What more, Mrs. Fenwick?"
"Well, he didn't just sit there staring out the window," she continued, her voice lowering as if sharing a secret. "He looked at the people around him, watched them like he was studying them, especially the women. And I remember him eyeing Sister Agatha when she walked in. He turned his head just a little too quickly, like he was hoping she wouldn't notice, but she did. You can always tell when someone's being watched, even if they don't admit it. Purbright absorbed her words carefully. You're saying he was looking at her in a way that seemed intentional? Mrs. Fenwick nodded, the smile on her lips fading. Oh, aye. It wasn't casual, Inspector. It was like he knew her, or at least thought he did. And then, not long after that night, she started acting odd. More. Withdrawn, like she was expecting something. She'd spend a lot of time in the garden of the convent, staring at the horizon. It was unsettling. And this man, did he speak to her? Any conversation? Mrs. Fenwick shook her head, slowly. Not a word. But I saw them exchange glances a couple of times. It was subtle, but it was there. And you know, when a man looks at a woman like that, you can almost hear the unspoken words. Something's brewing beneath the surface. You can feel it. Purbright's mind was working rapidly, piecing things together. This stranger wasn't just a passing traveller. There was something far deeper at play here. He had been watching Sister Agatha, or Elizabeth Porter, with a purpose. But what was the purpose, and why had he come now, after all these years? I've heard talk, Mrs. Fenwick continued, her tone shifting, becoming more cautious. Some say he's been around before, in years past. I don't know if it's true, but there were rumours about him being
involved in some things that didn't sit well with the town. There's more to his story than he's letting on. Purbright straightened, the weight of her words sinking in. Involved in what kind of things? Mrs. Fenwick leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper.
You'll want to be careful, Inspector. The man's name, well, it's not one I speak lightly. He's got a reputation. People here remember him from long ago. There's talk of debts, unfinished business, and a history that goes far beyond what anyone would want to know. Purbright felt a chill run down his spine. The pieces of the puzzle were slowly falling into place, but each new detail only led to more questions. He had a name, a man who had been here before, years ago, a man with a hidden past that seemed to be coming to the surface now. But Mrs. Fenwick wasn't giving it all up just yet. Who is he? Purbright pressed, his voice steady but urgent. What's his name? Mrs. Fenwick hesitated, her eyes flicking to the other patrons in the pub, as if measuring the risk of speaking further. Finally she spoke, her voice barely above a murmur. His name is Richard Haynes. Purbright's heart skipped a beat. The name had a weight to it, one that resonated with something dark, something long buried. Richard Haynes, Purbright repeated quietly, committing it to memory. Tell me more. What do you know about him? Mrs. Fenwick leaned back in her chair, her eyes narrowing. What I know is that he's trouble. Always has been. A man who never stays in one place for too long, always drifting, always looking for something. He's been in and out of this town for years. People say he's had dealings with folks who aren't exactly law-abiding, if you catch my meaning. Purbright nodded slowly. And Sister Agatha, Elizabeth Porter, what was her connection to him? Was she involved in these dealings? Mrs. Fenwick's gaze softened for a moment. I don't know, Inspector, but I do know this. She changed when he came around. Before him she was always the quiet, kind nun, always helping others. But after she met him, something shifted in her. She wasn't the same. She was distant, unsettled. I'm not saying she was involved in anything illegal, but I'll tell you this. She knew more about him than she ever let on. The silence between them deepened as Purbright absorbed the information. Richard Haynes was the key to everything, that much was certain. He was the man from Elizabeth Porter's past, the one who had been lurking in the shadows all this time. But what had brought him back to the town after all these years? What did he want with Elizabeth now? Purbright stood, his resolve hardening. "Thank you, Mrs. Fenwick. I'll need to speak to a few more people, but what you've told me is crucial. If you remember anything else, don't hesitate to let me know." The old woman nodded, her gaze thoughtful. "I'll keep an eye out, Inspector. But I warn you, this town isn't what it seems. There are things buried here, things people don't want dug up." Purbright gave her a brief nod, his mind already racing through the next steps. Richard Haines. The name echoed in his thoughts as he stepped back into the cool night air. The stranger was no mere traveller. He was a man with a past in this town, a past tied directly to Elizabeth Porter. But why had he returned now? And what had happened between them all those years ago? That had set this course in motion. The answers were just out of reach, but Purbright was closer than ever. The town's secrets were beginning to unravel, and with each new piece of the puzzle, the truth seemed to grow more complicated and more dangerous. Purbright's steps were quick and purposeful as he left the pub. The weight of Mrs. Fenwick's words hung heavily in the air, each one of them sinking deeper into his thoughts. Richard Haines. A man with a past in this town, a man who had somehow come back into Elizabeth Porter's life after all these years. Purbright had been right all along. This wasn't just a simple disappearance. This was something more, something tangled in a history that had been buried and forgotten by most of the townsfolk. But not by Elizabeth. And certainly not by Haines. The more he thought about it, the more convinced he became that Haines was the key to everything, but there were still so many unanswered questions. What exactly had happened between him and Elizabeth all those years ago? And why had he come back now to disrupt her quiet life? Purbright didn't believe in coincidences, and everything pointed to one thing. Haines had come back with a purpose, and Elizabeth had been caught in his web once again. He pulled his coat tighter against the chill and headed toward the edge of town where the old records were kept. If he was going to understand Haines's return, he needed to know more about the man's history, his past dealings in the town, his reputation. If he was involved in anything shady, there had to be a record of it, something that would shed light on what he wanted from Elizabeth now. The town's small archives were tucked away in a building that most people rarely visited, hidden behind rows of weathered homes and a thick line of trees. Purbright had been here before, but never for anything this important. As he approached the door, his mind raced, each thought focused on the task ahead. He needed to find the answers that would unlock the mystery, and he wasn't about to let anything stand in his way. Inside, the room was quiet, the only sound the rustle of papers and the occasional creak of old shelves. The air smelled faintly of dust and aged paper. The town archivist, a woman named Miss Hargrave, was seated at a desk in the far corner, her glasses perched on the end of her nose as she scribbled in a ledger. When she noticed Purbright entering, she looked up with a tired smile, her thin face creased with age. "Inspector Purbright," she greeted him, setting aside her pen. "What brings you here today? Another round of paperwork, I presume?" Purbright returned her smile, though his thoughts were far from light. "Actually, Miss Hargrave, I'm here for something a bit more specific. I need to look into the records for someone, Richard Haines. I'm hoping you have something on him, perhaps from years ago." The mention of the name caused a brief flicker in Miss Hargrave's expression. It wasn't enough for anyone else to notice, but Purbright caught it. She knew something. Her hand paused on the desk, and for a moment she seemed to hesitate, as if deciding whether or not to share whatever she knew. "Richard Haines, you say?" she asked, her voice quiet. I can't say I've seen that name in quite a while. But there's always something in the records. You're looking for anything in particular?" "I need to know everything about him," Purbright replied, his tone firm but polite. "Any dealings he had here, anything that might connect him to Elizabeth Porter, or Sister Agatha, as she's known now." Miss Hargrave's eyes shifted to the side, and Purbright could tell she was considering how best to respond. After a long moment she nodded, almost reluctantly, and rose from her desk. "Come with me," she said, leading him to the back of the room, where rows of dusty old filing cabinets stood. She pulled open one of the drawers and began sorting through the old files with practiced ease. The silence stretched on as Purbright watched, waiting for something, anything, that could shed light on Haynes's connection to Elizabeth. Finally, Miss Hargrave stopped, pulling out a folder that looked older than anything else in the room. The yellowing pages were brittle with age, but she handled them carefully, as if afraid they might crumble in her hands. She opened the file and began flipping through the papers, muttering to herself. "Here it is," she said softly, pointing to a faded document near the back of the file. This was from several years ago, a report about Haynes being involved in something, a disagreement with some local families, some debts that never seemed to be repaid. Purbright leaned in closer, his eyes scanning the words. The document was old, the handwriting nearly illegible, but the key points stood out. Haynes had come to the town years ago, looking for work. He had been a smooth talker, a man with charm that hid a darker edge. He had struck deals with several townsfolk, promising them quick returns on investments, but it had all been a lie. Haynes had disappeared just as quickly as he had arrived, leaving behind unpaid debts and broken promises. But there was something else, something that made Purbright's heart skip a beat. One of the names mentioned in the report stood out, Elizabeth Porter. She had been one of the families involved in these dealings, though the report didn't specify how. She had been young at the time, newly arrived in town, and it seemed that Haynes had preyed on her innocence, using her in some way to further his own agenda. Purbright felt a flicker of recognition. This wasn't just a case of someone being taken advantage of, it was something more. Haynes had known exactly what he was doing, and Elizabeth had been caught up in it, whether willingly or not. But why had she taken such a drastic step to leave it all behind? Why had she chosen to become Sister Agatha? He turned to Miss Hargrave, his mind reeling with the implications. "Do you have anything else? Any other information about Haynes or his dealings here?" She hesitated, then nodded, her face tense. "There's more, Inspector. But I think you should be careful with what you're asking. Richard Haynes, he's a dangerous man, and there are people in this town who would rather his past stay buried." Purbright's jaw tightened. "I don't intend to stop until I have all the answers. If there's more to be found, Miss Hargrave, I need it." She looked at him for a long moment before nodding again. "All right. But you should know, Haynes didn't just disappear years ago. He's been in and out of the town more times than anyone cares to admit, and the last time he left, he took something with him, something valuable to Elizabeth." Purbright's pulse quickened. "What did he take?" Miss Hargrave didn't answer immediately. Instead, she closed the file, the pages crinkling slightly as she did so. "That, Inspector, is the part of the story you're not ready to hear, but you will be soon enough. I'll pull the rest of the records for you. But be careful. Haynes is still here. And this time he's not just after money." The weight of Miss Hargrave's words hung in the air like a cloud ready to burst. Haynes hadn't just disappeared years ago. He had been in and out of the town, each return more cryptic than the last. And now something valuable to Elizabeth Porter had gone missing. The thought gnawed at Purbright's mind. What could Haynes have taken that was so important? And why was Elizabeth's past still haunting her, despite the life she had built? In the convent? Purbright left the archives with a heavy heart, the pieces of the puzzle fitting together just enough to raise more questions. The town was small, its secrets deep-rooted. Everyone seemed to know something, but no one wanted to talk. The silence around Haynes's actions was deafening. The more Purbright dug, the more it seemed that the entire town had been complicit in hiding the truth. As he walked back toward the center of town, the evening shadows growing longer, Purbright couldn't shake the feeling that he was getting closer to something dangerous. The deeper he went, the more he realized this wasn't just a missing persons case. It was the unraveling of an old, unresolved crime. And somewhere, at the heart of it all, was Richard Haynes. His steps slowed as he neared the old stone bridge that crossed the river. He had been here before, many times, but tonight the place felt different. There was a heavy stillness in the
air, as if the town itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen.
Purbright paused at the edge of the bridge, looking down at the dark water flowing beneath. It was the kind of place where decisions were made, where lives could change with a single choice. The town had its secrets, but he was determined to uncover them. He glanced back toward the heart of the town, the low hum of evening activity still alive in the air. There was no time to waste. He needed to find Haynes, and he needed to do it soon. But first, he had to piece together everything he had learned so far. Elizabeth Porter, a woman with a hidden past. Richard Haynes, a man who had taken something valuable and left a trail of broken promises in his wake. And now Elizabeth was gone. Purbright had a feeling that Haynes was still in town, lurking just out of sight. The tension in the air told him he was getting close, but the truth was still elusive. What had happened between the two of them all those years ago? What had been taken? Purbright turned and headed toward the old church, the bells tolling faintly in the distance. If there was one place he hadn't yet explored thoroughly, it was the convent itself. It was where Elizabeth had lived for so many years, but it was also the place where she had been most vulnerable. If Haynes had left something behind, something important, it was likely hidden there, tucked away where only Elizabeth knew to look. The churchyard was quiet, the stone walls looming in the fading light. As Purbright stepped through the gate, he noticed the familiar figure of Sister Agnes walking slowly toward the chapel. She was one of the older nuns, and though she wasn't close to Elizabeth, she had been a fixture in the convent for years. Purbright had spoken to her briefly during his earlier inquiries, but now he felt an urgency to speak with her again. There were things she might know, things that could give him the final clue. He approached her, his steps soft on the gravel path. She looked up as he neared, offering a faint, welcoming smile. "Inspector Purbright," she greeted him, her voice kind but weary. "What brings you here at this hour?" "Sister Agnes," Purbright said, his voice respectful but purposeful. "I'm sorry
to disturb you, but I need to ask you a few more questions about Sister Agatha, about Elizabeth Porter."
"I'm afraid there's more to her disappearance than we first realized." Sister Agnes's smile faded slightly, replaced by a look of quiet concern. "I had hoped this would all blow over soon. We've been praying for her safe return. But I fear you may be right, Inspector. There's something troubling about all of this." Purbright watched her closely, noting the way her eyes darted momentarily toward the chapel doors. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice low. "Is there something you're not telling me?" She hesitated, her hands folding tightly in front of her. Elizabeth. She was a troubled soul, even before she came to us. She wanted peace, yes, but she was always running from something. I don't think she ever fully escaped whatever it was that haunted her. I noticed she'd become more withdrawn in the last few months. Sometimes she'd wake up in the middle of the night, as if she'd heard something, seen something. She'd often mutter in her sleep, and Sister Agnes paused, swallowing hard. I think she was waiting for someone from her past. Purbright leaned in closer, his voice gentle but insistent. Do you know who? Who was she waiting for, sister? Sister Agnes looked down, her hands wringing the hem of her habit. I don't know, Inspector, but I believe she was afraid. She spoke of someone coming, someone she didn't want to face, and she would never tell me who. She kept it all locked inside, just like she kept her past hidden from the rest of us. All I know is that she was waiting for something, or someone, and when they came, she vanished. Purbright's mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of information. Did she leave anything behind? Any letters, notes, anything that could point to where she went or who she was expecting? Sister Agnes shook her head slowly. Nothing. She was very private, even in the end. Whatever she was afraid of, she carried it alone. Purbright stood up, a sense of urgency settling over him. He was close, so close, but there was still something he was missing. Elizabeth had known who was coming, and now he needed to find out who that was. Thank you, sister, he said quietly. You've been very helpful. As he turned to leave, Sister Agnes called after him, her voice soft. Please, Inspector, be careful. There are things in this town that have been buried for a reason. Purbright nodded, the warning echoing in his mind. As he stepped back into the growing darkness, the pieces were almost all in place. Haynes, Elizabeth, and whatever secret she had kept hidden all these years. Purbright wasn't far from uncovering the truth. But the truth, he knew, could be more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. Purbright's thoughts churned as he left the convent grounds, the darkness of the evening pressing in on him. The pieces were almost there, just within reach. Sister Agnes had confirmed what he had already suspected. Elizabeth had been waiting for someone, and whoever it was had caused her to disappear. The more Purbright thought about it, the more he realized how carefully everything had been orchestrated, how Elizabeth's life had been woven into a narrative of fear and secrecy. But there was still one critical piece missing, the identity of the man who had come back for her. Richard Haynes had been the thread that connected everything, but Purbright needed more. He needed to know why Haynes had left so suddenly all those years ago and why he was back now. The answers were hidden somewhere in this town, waiting for him to find them. But the town itself seemed to be holding its breath, as if it knew that the moment those secrets were uncovered, everything would change. Purbright made his way to the constable's office, a quiet determination in his steps. As he approached, he noticed the light in the window of the small station flickering. Henry was still at his desk. The constable had been doing his best to assist with the investigation, but Purbright had a feeling that there was more the young officer could uncover if he put his mind to it. Inside, the office smelled faintly of ink and stale paper. Constable. Henry looked up from his work, his brow furrowing as he saw Purbright enter. Evening, sir, Henry greeted, standing up quickly. Anything new? Purbright nodded, but his expression was tight. I need you to look into something for me. This man, Richard Haynes, he's been in and out of this town for years. I believe he was involved in something illegal before he left, and I need to know exactly what that was. Can you pull up any more records on him? I need everything you can find. Henry didn't hesitate. "Of course, Inspector. I'll get right on it." Purbright took a seat at the desk, watching as Henry started pulling through a stack of old papers. The young constable was efficient, his fingers moving quickly through the files, but Purbright couldn't help but feel a sense of impatience. The pieces were so close, but something was still holding him back, something that needed to fall into place before he could move forward. Minutes passed, and Henry found what he was looking for. A file, thick with yellowed pages, detailing Richard Haynes' previous dealings in the town. Purbright leaned forward, his attention fixed, as Henry began to read aloud the key points. "It looks like Haynes first came to town about 15 years ago," Henry began, scanning the documents. "He wasn't here for long, but he made a lasting impression. He was involved with a few local families, offering investment opportunities. According to this report, he promised returns on businesses he claimed to have connections with, but when the money was supposed to come through, it never did, and it looks like he left town abruptly with a few debts still unpaid." Purbright's pulse quickened. This was the same man who had returned, the same man who had been watching Elizabeth. But why? The town's record on Haynes seemed to suggest that his interests were always monetary, but there was something deeper here. Something about Elizabeth. "Keep going," Purbright urged, his voice steady but laced with urgency. Henry turned the page, his eyes narrowing. "There's something odd here. Haynes made one last appearance before he left town, a short visit, but it was noted that he seemed to be particularly interested in one person, and that person was Elizabeth Porter. At the time, she was just starting to make her way into the community. The records don't go into much detail, but it seems like he was keeping tabs on her. The town's elders had warned her about him, but—" Purbright leaned closer, his thoughts racing. "But she didn't heed the warnings, did she?" Henry nodded slowly. "No, sir. It looks like Elizabeth got involved with him somehow. I don't know if it was just business or if something else was going on. But after he left, she made a sudden decision to enter the convent. And that was the last anyone saw of him until—"
Now, Purbright sat back in his chair, processing the information. The pieces were aligning in his mind. Haynes hadn't just come back for money. He had come back for Elizabeth, for something she had that he wanted. But what was it?
What had she kept hidden all these years, and why had it been so important to Haynes? As he sat in contemplation, his eyes wandered to the window, where the dark sky stretched out beyond the town's quiet streets. Something was off. He could feel it in his bones. The town wasn't just hiding secrets, it was suffocating under them. And if Purbright wasn't careful, he might end up uncovering more than he could handle. "Anything else in that file?" Purbright asked, his voice low, his mind still racing. Henry continued flipping through the documents. "One more thing," he said, his voice trailing off. "This is interesting. Haynes, just before he left, had some sort of confrontation with Elizabeth. It doesn't say what happened, but there's a note here about her becoming very agitated. After that, she was seen talking to some of the town's elders, people who had known her family for years. They arranged for her to go to the convent shortly after." Purbright stood up abruptly, his chair scraping across the floor. "This is it," he muttered to himself, more to reassure his thoughts than anyone else. "The missing piece. Haynes threatened
Her in some way, and that's what drove her to the convent.
Whatever happened between them, it wasn't just about money." Henry looked up, confusion in his eyes. But why would she disappear now? If Haynes had already caused all this before, what has changed? Purbright turned toward the door, his mind already formulating the next steps. Because Haynes didn't come back just for the money, he came back for her. And whatever he's after now, I don't think he's leaving until he gets it. The tension in Purbright's chest grew with each step he took, but he knew what had to be done. Richard Haynes was still out there, lurking in the shadows of the town, waiting for the right moment to strike. Purbright couldn't let him slip away again. The truth was close, but with each new revelation, the danger grew, and Purbright wasn't sure if he was ready for what was coming next. But one thing was certain. He would face it head-on, no matter the cost. Purbright's mind churned as he stepped out of the constable's office, the late-night air cool against his face. Everything was beginning to fall into place, but there were still too many pieces left to uncover. Richard Haynes had always been a shadow in the town, slipping in and out unnoticed, leaving behind only whispers and broken promises. But now Purbright understood. Haynes had never really left. He'd been waiting, watching, planning, and Elizabeth Porter, Sister Agatha, had been the one person he'd never fully let go of. Purbright's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind him. He turned, instinctively reaching for his coat, but relaxed when he saw Constable Henry approaching. "Inspector?" Henry said, a slight breathlessness in his voice. "I've been thinking about something. You said Haynes had been involved with Elizabeth."
All those years ago, but there's something else I remembered from the records. Something that might connect him to the families he worked with. Purbright's eyes narrowed with interest. "Go on."
Henry glanced around, lowering his voice. "It's about the businesses Haynes was involved with. According to this, he wasn't just after money. He was involved in land deals too. There was one family, the Cartwrights. They were a big part of the dealings. They lost a lot of land in the process, and rumors say that Haynes had some sort of leverage over them." Purbright's pulse quickened. "Leverage? What kind of leverage?" Henry shifted uneasily, clearly not comfortable with what he was about to say. "There's a note here about Elizabeth. It doesn't go into specifics, but it says that she was involved in securing the land deals for Haynes."
And Henry paused, clearly conflicted about continuing. "And there's a note about a letter she wrote, a confession of sorts." Purbright's stomach tightened. A confession? What was in it? Henry didn't answer immediately, his
gaze flickering to the street behind Purbright, as if ensuring no one else was listening. "It's not clear, but from what I can gather, it seems Elizabeth felt guilty about being involved in some of Haynes's dealings. She might have had a hand in convincing the Cartwrights to sell land under false pretenses. I'm not sure if it was coercion or something else, but this letter suggests that she was afraid of what she had done." Purbright's mind reeled. Elizabeth had been more involved than anyone realized. She wasn't just a victim in this story. She had been a participant, and it seemed that whatever she had done had weighed heavily on her. "Where is this letter?" Purbright asked, his voice low and urgent. "I've put in a request to get it from the archives," Henry said, "but it's locked away in a safe place. I don't have access to it directly. But if we get our hands on it, it might tell us more about why she ran away and why Haynes came back." Purbright thought for a moment, the gravity of the situation sinking in. "We need that letter. If it's tied to the land deals and if it mentions the Cartwrights, it might be the missing piece we need. Haynes didn't just come back for money. He came back because of something Elizabeth had buried. We have to get to the bottom of it, and fast." Henry nodded, clearly understanding the urgency. "I'll follow up with the archives first thing tomorrow. Sir, I'll make sure we get that letter." Purbright stood still for a moment, his mind racing through the new information. Elizabeth hadn't just disappeared because of fear. There was guilt involved, a hidden past that she had tried to bury. But Haynes, a man who had never truly left, had returned to finish something. What that something was, Purbright wasn't sure yet, but he was getting closer. "We'll meet again at first light," Purbright said, his tone resolute. "I'll be at the Cartwrights' farm in the morning. I need to speak with them. They may know more than they're letting on about Haynes's involvement in their land deals." Henry nodded again, his face set with determination. "Understood, sir." As Purbright walked away, the weight of the night settled over him like a cloak. The Cartwrights' farm was on the outskirts of town, a large estate that had been in the family for generations. The land was valuable, a piece of history in a town that didn't change much. If Haynes had manipulated the Cartwrights all those years ago, there had to be something hidden there, a truth buried deep within the past that had caused all of this. Purbright's mind kept returning to Elizabeth. She had been the key, but she hadn't realized it at the time. The guilt, the fear, it had driven her to the convent. And now it seemed that whatever secrets she had hidden from the world were coming to light in a way she could never have imagined. By the time Purbright reached his small, modest lodgings for the night, the streets had quieted, the sound of his footsteps the only noise left in the darkened town. He poured himself a drink, his thoughts still locked on the Cartwrights and the letter. The pieces were almost in place, but there was one final step before he could make sense of it all. And he was prepared to do whatever it took to find that last piece. As he sank into his chair, the cold drink in his hand, his mind drifted back to the last conversation he'd had with Sister Agnes. Her warning still echoed in his ears, a cautionary tale of how deep the town's secrets ran. Purbright knew the danger, but the drive to uncover the truth was stronger than any threat. Tomorrow, the Cartwrights' farm would be his next stop. There, the final pieces would fall into place. He was certain of it. But the truth, he feared, would not be kind. The past was a heavy weight, and it was about to be unleashed on a town that had kept its secrets far too long. The storm that had been brewing for years was about to break. The sun had barely begun to rise when Purbright set out for the Cartwrights' farm. The early morning light filtered through the trees as he made his way down the dirt road, each step heavy with the weight of the secrets he was about to uncover. His mind raced with the information he had gathered, the letter, the land deals, the connection to Haynes, and he couldn't shake the feeling that the moment he walked through that farm gate, everything would change. The Cartwrights' property sat on the edge of town, sprawling fields and a large farmhouse that had seen better days. The family had lived here for generations, but over the years the land had become more valuable, and with that came the pressure to protect it. Haynes had known exactly what he was doing when he'd set his sights on the Cartwrights. It was clear now that whatever had happened between them years ago had been the catalyst for everything that followed. As Purbright reached the entrance to the farm, he noticed the worn gate that stood ajar, the hinges squeaking as if protesting the intrusion. He paused for a moment, scanning the landscape. There was a feeling of stillness here, a quietness that seemed almost unnatural for such a large estate. The Cartwrights had always been an important family in the town, but now there was something more to their legacy, something buried deep in the history of their land. He pushed the gate open, the gravel crunching underfoot, and made his way toward the farmhouse. The sound of his footsteps echoed through the yard, and as he neared the porch, the door creaked open. A figure stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the dim light of the morning. It was Mrs. Cartwright, the matriarch of the family, a woman in her late 60s with sharp eyes that had seen more than most. Her features were weathered, But there was a strength to her, a determination that matched the land she had spent her life tending. She had always been a formidable presence in the town, but Purbright could see the weariness in her now. "Inspector," she said, her voice soft but firm, "I didn't expect to see you here this early." "I'm sorry to disturb you, Mrs. Cartwright," Purbright replied, tipping his hat respectfully. "But I need to ask you a few questions. I hope you'll be able to help me." She studied him for a moment, her gaze sharp and calculating. "Questions?"
About what? Purbright hesitated, knowing this was the moment when everything could change. About Richard Haynes. I believe he was involved in some land deals with your family years ago, and I'm trying to understand what happened.
"There are some things that still don't add up." Mrs. Cartwright's expression hardened at the mention of Haynes's name. "Haynes?" She shook her head, the bitterness clear in her voice. "That man is trouble, Inspector. He's been nothing but trouble for this family, for this town." Purbright stepped closer, keeping his tone neutral. "I know that. But I need to understand exactly what happened between him and your family. There's more to this than just bad business dealings. You must know something?" Mrs. Cartwright's eyes flicked to the side as if weighing whether to speak. After a long pause, she stepped aside and motioned for him to enter. "Come inside," she said. "I don't know how much help I'll be, but I'll tell you what I know." The inside of the farmhouse was dark, the air thick with the smell of old wood and dust. Mrs. Cartwright led him into a small sitting room where the faint glow of the early morning light filtered through the windows. She gestured for him to sit, then took a seat opposite him, folding her hands in her lap. "Richard Haynes," she began, her voice low. "He came into our lives when we were desperate. The land was becoming more valuable, and we needed a way to keep it within the family. Haynes promised us a deal, one that would save us. He said he had connections, that he could help us expand, make the land even more profitable." She paused, her face tightening. "But that was all lies. He took advantage."
Of our trust. He manipulated us. Purbright leaned forward, his curiosity piqued.
"How did he manipulate you? What exactly did he do?" Mrs. Cartwright's eyes hardened as she spoke. "He promised us things we couldn't even imagine. But it was all built on a lie. He convinced us to sell a portion of the land under false pretenses, and when the deal fell through, we were left with nothing. He disappeared just as quickly as he came, leaving us with debts we could never repay. And after that, Elizabeth, Sister Agatha, she left too. She went into the convent, and we never saw her again." Purbright's mind raced as he absorbed her words. Elizabeth's decision to enter the convent had been the final act, the last way she could escape her involvement in those dealings. But there was something more here, something Mrs. Cartwright wasn't saying. "You're saying Haynes left after the deal fell through, and Elizabeth went to the convent. But why now?"
Why would he come back after all these years? Mrs. Cartwright's gaze darkened, and for a moment she seemed lost in thought. "Because he's always been after something. He's never truly left. The money was just part of it. There was something else he wanted, something Elizabeth had. I don't know what it was, but I know he was never going to let her go." Purbright felt a chill run through him. This wasn't just about money. Haynes had come back for Elizabeth, not just for the land.
And whatever it was that had tied them together all those years ago was still hanging over them. He had to find out what Haynes was after, and he had to do it quickly. "Did Elizabeth ever mention anything about this, Mrs. Cartwright?" Purbright asked, his voice steady despite the urgency building inside him. "Did she leave anything behind? Anything that could help me understand what Haynes is after? Mrs. Cartwright looked away, her hands trembling slightly in her lap. "There was a letter," she said softly. "Elizabeth wrote it before she left. She said she had to leave to protect us, to protect the family from Haynes. She said it was the only way, but I never read it. I don't think I could. It was too painful." Purbright's pulse quickened. The letter. There it was, the final piece. It wasn't just a letter, it was the key to everything. Whatever Elizabeth had written in that letter, it was what Haynes had been waiting for. And now, Purbright had to find it. "Where is the letter, Mrs. Cartwright?" he asked, his voice urgent. "Please, it's crucial." She hesitated, her eyes clouded with uncertainty. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she spoke. "It's in the attic, behind the old chest in the far corner. It's the only thing left from that time. But be careful, Inspector. That letter, it's not just a letter, it's the truth. And the truth is something Haynes has been hunting for all these years." Purbright stood up, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it, the final step. He had everything he needed to confront Haynes, to unravel the truth once and for all. He turned toward the door, his mind focused on the letter, on what it would reveal. The past was finally coming to the surface, and with it, the storm that had been brewing for so long was about to break wide open.